Birds. They're found in almost every habitat across the world. There are roughly 11,000 different species of birds on the planet, many of which have evolved quite unique but subtle ways to interact and communicate. Feeding, flying, courtship, raising chicks, and competition are just a few of the social interactions that birds have every day. New technologies and research are providing glimpses into the life of birds, uncovering the most spectacular stories. Around the globe, birds can be seen flocking together in vast numbers. Living close together like this has many benefits. With hundreds, if not thousands of eyes constantly on the lookout, the flock acts as an exceptional tool to warn others of danger. When there is a predator on the way, then individuals have a better chance of survival. A flock in flight disorientates predators, splitting like a shoal of fish when a hunter tries to make contact. These are starlings, famous for their mesmerizing murmurations. On winter evenings, thousands meet to perform a stunning display of twists and turns, moving through the air as one before they roost for the night. These performances can confuse and maybe even hypnotize predators enough to keep them safe from attack. We now know that the message to turn starts from just a few individuals, likely those on the periphery, who can see oncoming danger. The message is then swept through the flock at speeds of up to 40 meters per second. And so in a flock of 400, it takes just over half a second for the whole group to change direction. But in these split-second direction changes, how do birds manage to avoid collision with one another? Engineers at the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology at Seewiesen in Germany are building miniature microphones to answer this very question. This would never have been possible until very recently. But scientists have managed to create devices small enough to be attached to tiny birds. These microphones are designed to be extremely light, weighing less than a gram. They're then fitted as backpacks, so the individual calls of each bird can be precisely recorded. Dr. Suzanne Hoffmann is studying bird communication here in Seewiesen. To understand more about the mysteries of communication in flight, she has trained captive zebra finches to fly in a wind tunnel. Suzanne uses this technology to understand how birds are able to communicate within a flock and to avoid crashing into one another. For a crash may result in a broken wing, a potentially fatal injury. She waves a stick underneath the zebra finches to encourage them to remain in the air, allowing her to record their continuous flight.
Jeder einzelne Vogel, der jetzt hier im Schwarm geflogen ist, hat ein kleines Miniaturmikrofon auf dem Rücken getragen, das mir erlaubt hat, die individuellen Vokalisationen der Tiere aufzunehmen. Und hier kann ich jetzt sehen, an den einzelnen Tonspuren, wann welcher Vogel einen Laut ausgesendet hat und kann das dann mit den Bewegungen der Vögel im Schwarm in Zusammenhang bringen. Ich vermute zum Beispiel, dass ein Vogel, der ganz vorne im Schwarm fliegt, einen Ruf aussendet, bevor er seine Position im Schwarm ändert, um die Schwarmmitglieder zu warnen und die Aufmerksamkeit auf diesen Vogel zu richten, um Kollisionen zu verhindern.
We now know that birds can discuss their every move to avoid accidental impacts. But this ability to communicate with the flock is even more essential when there's an immediate threat. Once danger has been spotted, teamwork becomes the key to survival. Alarmed birds call to one another, summoning others to join an attack. This behavior might seem quite straightforward, but scientists at the University of Exeter in the UK are understanding that in some birds, it's much more complex. Here in Cornwall, in the southwest of England, jackdaws exhibit a fascinating response to danger. Dr. Gil McIver uses a model predator to understand the flocking behaviour of these birds.
Underneath here is not what I normally carry in my boots. It's Fergus the fox.
At this time of the year, foxes are a huge threat to their recently fledged chicks. And so the jackdaws are sure to be very wary as one appears near the nest. To make things even more threatening, Gil has placed a model jackdaw in the mouth of the fox, alarming the birds of serious danger.
Now the fox is uncovered, the last thing to do is get the speaker in position. Just use a bit of grass to disguise it a little, and now we'll go back to the hide. Okay, so we're ready to start the playback now. Okay, so we've just started the playback. This is the single caller, so one bird and just 15 calls.
These calls catch the flock's attention, but they respond very cautiously.
Starting to get a few birds coming in from the far field, circling above the fox now.
Only some are brave enough to investigate the source of danger.
In the second phase of this experiment, we're going to play a playback which has the same number of calls, but it's going to be different in that there's going to be 5 individuals contributing these calls. So the number of calls that the birds will hear will be exactly the same as the last time, but there's just going to be more callers that they hear.
Gil now plays the calls of many different mobbing birds. But how will they respond this time?
We have the first responses from the local birds. It's far more risky to be the second individual to join a mob than it is to be, say, the 5th or maybe even the 10th individual. And so the jackdaws would be more inclined to join when there's more callers. Not only is it safer, it could also be an indicator that there's something, a far greater threat. A single bird being unhappy maybe isn't too much to be worried about, but if there's 5, then maybe that's worthy of investigation.
The reaction to these calls is very different to the last. Many more birds are now confident enough to join the mob.
And so to begin with, the mob is quite chaotic, so there's lots of birds coming in and they're following what's called metric rules, whereby they only start interacting with the birds around them when they're about 5 meters away from each other.
Once a critical density has been reached, the bird's behavior begins to change.
Then there comes a point and you start to see order emerge from the chaos. And this is probably something that they do so that they are less likely to have collisions, but it could also help them because they're acting in a more coordinated way to drive away the predator. Because we've played the calls of 5 different individuals here, they've recruited many more birds than we had when we were just playing the same number of calls, but only of one individual.
This experiment reveals that jackdaws can tell each other's voices apart and count how many of their fellows are already calling when deciding whether to join a mob. But how do birds know who's a friend and who is an enemy? Professor Alex Thornton and colleagues at Exeter University have uncovered this very secret.
For the jackdaws, one of the most dangerous things around is humans. But the problem is that not all humans are dangerous. So some people pose a threat, they might go around shooting the jackdaws. Other people are not threatening, and so if the birds spent their whole time being scared of everybody, they'd never get anything done. We've found that they can learn about who's dangerous and who's not through personal experience, but that's quite risky. So we were interested to know if they could also learn from the reactions of others.
To understand if the jackdaws can do this, they must first be introduced to a totally new face.
Looking good. Excellent.
The jackdaws know both Alex and Gil very well, and so the mask acts as a vital disguise, allowing them to approach the jackdaws as someone they haven't already registered as a friend or a threat.
So you've got the same person in different situations, and that person would go and sit next to a nest box, and we would either play the scolding calls, the alarm calls of another individual. So that's basically saying, watch out, this person's dangerous. Or we would play contact calls, which indicates that everything's okay. And then after this training phase, if you like, the person then goes back without any calls playing, and we see how the birds in the nearby nest box respond.
The recordings will mimic real bird calls, and so Alex and Gil can understand if jackdaws learn who to trust, purely by word of mouth from other birds. At the first location, he plays the contact call, telling the birds that he's a friend and not a threat. Now to the second location. Here, he plays the alarm call, this time signaling to the birds that he means danger. It's time for the real test. When Gil returns to each jackdaw site, will they remember him? And more importantly, how will they react? First, he returns to location 1, where he originally played the contact call. These jackdaws remain calm. Here, Gil is not perceived to be a threat. He then goes to the second location. The last time these jackdaws saw Gil, they heard the alarm call. But how will they react now? Just by looking at him, these jackdaws immediately panic, recognizing him as a threat.
This information can be transmitted very quickly, so it can spread very rapidly to individuals who've never encountered this human before, and it can persist for years in some cases. So there's cases of experiments that have been done in Washington State in the US, where years after the experiment, if experimenters go out wearing the original mask, the birds will still go and mob them.
And so, for jackdaws, first impressions always count. For all birds, escaping and avoiding predators is an essential part of life. But during the breeding season, the stakes are even greater. At this time of year, mobbing drastically increases. Birds must balance their own survival with that of their chicks, for without them, the chance to pass their genes onto the next generation is lost. Mobbing also gives males the chance to show off their physical fitness in an effort to impress potential mates. For it's up to the female to decide who she breeds with. Some birds choose to do this with their feathers. Peacocks have evolved to charm and persuade. As for them, it's a matter of life or death. They either reproduce or they don't. But until recently, it was unclear what the hens are actually selecting for, whether it be long tails or the quantity of shimmering eye spots. Research now shows that, in fact, no single feature is as important as the whole display. Each component of the dance works in unison, so to be as marvelous and charming as possible. Moreover, during these performances, the males rattle their tail feathers, generating an ultra-low frequency noise, informing others of their location. This sound is inaudible to humans and serves to entice females over and deter other males, whilst going unnoticed by potential predators. A dance like this by the males requires powerful muscles and a lot of energy. So a successful performance signals to the females just how fit they are, whilst also intimidating other male competitors. Ruffs have some of the most diverse plumage within birds of the same species. Whilst the females are small and rather dull in appearance, the males all look exceptionally different. This variety has given rise to a very strange and rather unique breeding strategy. These birds are being studied here at the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology by Dr. Clemens Kappa.
Und alle diese Männchen sehen eigentlich anders aus. Man sieht, dass nicht das Gefieder von zwei Männchen das gleiche ist, sondern alle sind völlig anders. Aber wenn man genauer hinschaut, dann sieht man zwei unterschiedliche Typen schon von Männchen.
Each ruff possesses one of three variants of what's known as a supergene. Depending on which supergene a ruff has will determine their appearance, and in males, their courtship behavior.
Einmal die, die dunkler sind, die größer sind, wie dieses Männchen hier gerade im Vordergrund, oder gehören zu den sogenannten Kämpfern. Die verteidigen aggressiv ein Territorium und kämpfen gegen ihre Nachbarn, andere Kämpfer. Und der zweite Typ sind diese helleren, mit dem helleren Gefieder, mit den helleren Halskrausen, die heißen Satelliten. Und die kämpfen nicht und haben kein eigenes Territorium. Aber was sie tun, ist, sie schließen sich mit einem Kämpfer zusammen und balzen dann auf dem Territorium von dem Kämpfer mit ihm zusammen. Und das wirkt sehr attraktiv auf die Weibchen und die Weibchen bevorzugen diese Allianz von zwei Männchen dann damit. Das heißt, der Kämpfer und der Satellit, diese Koalition ist besonders beliebt bei den Weibchen und hat besonders viel Erfolg bei der Fortpflanzung.
Fighters will strut around, with their satellite or wingman in tow, showing off their grand plumage in the hopes of attracting multiple females to breed with, fighting any other males who attempt to make a move in their territory. But sometimes they aren't aware of the competition.
Kam es irgendwann in der Evolutionsgeschichte dieser Art zu einem Unfall, zu einem genetischen Unfall. Das heißt eine chromosomale Inversion. Was passiert ist, ein Stück von einem Chromosom ist abgebrochen und hat sich andersrum eingesetzt. Und das hat einen neuen Typ von Männchen geschaffen, die nicht mehr diese typischen Männchenmerkmale haben, sondern eigentlich aussehen wie die Weibchen.
This third variant of the supergene is rare and produces what's known as faders. These males are hidden behind the ultimate disguise. For not only do they look exactly like females, they also behave like them. The two other male variants, the fighters and the satellites, find faders just as attractive as the females, for they can't tell the difference, and so they often try to mate with them too. However, this disguise comes in very handy for the fader, as they're able to use their rarity to their advantage. The faders can sneak past the male fighters and their wingmen completely unnoticed. And whilst the fighters are busy mating or deterring others, the faders get to work finding a female they can mate with themselves. Despite not looking like the attractive ornamental males, it's possible that some females really like the faders and will actively try to mate with them.
So können alle diese drei Strategien gemeinsam überleben. Und wir versuchen zu verstehen, wie es möglich ist, dass diese drei eigentlich nicht aussterben, ja? Dass nicht eine übernimmt. Und es scheint eine delikate Balance zu sein, dass es, wenn eine von diesen Strategien häufiger wird, dass die andere Strategie dann mehr Vorteile hat. Ja? Das heißt, sie können davon nicht aussterben.
But not all birds have such complex breeding strategies or such variation in plumage. So how do these birds choose who to breed with when all their potential options look the same? Zebra finches are found across Australia. The males can be identified by the black band across their chest. In the wild, they live in social flocks of 100 or more birds, making the ever so important decision of mate selection seemingly rather tricky, especially when all the potential options look almost identical. But Dr. Wolfgang Forstmeier from the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology is realizing that there is extraordinary variation in their personality and behavior. And this plays an important role in mate choice. Looks aren't everything if you want to mate for life. And so, for a female zebrafinch, personality is key. For them, it's all about the behavioral compatibility between them and their partner.
Wenn sie mehr Interesse hat, kann sie sehr subtile Flirtsignale aussenden. Das ist zum Beispiel das Schnabelwetzen an der Sitzstange. Das kommt aus dem Nahrungssuchkontext eigentlich. Bei der Nahrungssuche, wenn sie die Samen schälen, bleiben oft so Hülsenreste am Schnabel kleben und dann wetzen sie den Schnabel an der Sitzstange, um diese Hülsenreste loszuwerden. Und dieses Verhalten bei der Interaktion zwischen Männchen und Weibchen ist so eine Art ganz dezentes Flirtsignal. Das Männchen kann so den Schnabel wetzen, einfach mal zu schauen, ob das Weibchen das nachmacht, dieses Verhalten. Und so kann er sozusagen ihr Interesse austesten, ohne Angst zu haben und gleich einen Korb zu bekommen. Wenn das Weibchen interessiert ist, dann beginnt meistens so ein Balzritual, dass sie im Kreis hüpft. Also sie hüpft immer weg vom Männchen, um auszutesten, ob er interessiert genug ist, ihr zu folgen. Und am Ende dieses Balztanzes kann sie dann entweder das Männchen zur Kopulation auffordern oder nicht.
These interactions vary between individuals. Some males are particularly aggressive, while others adopt a more peaceful strategy. It's then up to the female to decide which she prefers. Although looks aren't important, there is one thing besides personality that may help zebra finches in their quest for a mate: their voice.
Und jetzt kommen 10 verschiedene Weibchen mit ihren unterschiedlichen Stimmcharakteristika. Und anhand dieser Charakteristika kann das Männchen sein Weibchen wiederfinden.
The males also have unique calls, and they learn these from a young age by imitating others. However, for males to stand out in such large flocks, each one will create not only its own call, but its own original song. These are sung in an attempt to attract a partner, but once a pair has been formed, the song plays an entirely new role.
Interessant sind dann die Gesänge, die ein bisschen eine andere Funktion haben. Die sind länger und dienen vermutlich dazu, die Reproduktionsphysiologie des Weibchens anzukurbeln, also sie zu stimulieren, Eier zu produzieren und solche Dinge. Bei den Männchen ist es so, dass sie ihren Gesang, der ist relativ kurz, sagen wir 1 Sekunde oder ein bisschen weniger, und dieser Teil wird immer wieder wiederholt. Und jedes Männchen hat einen sehr individuenspezifischen, sehr charakteristischen Gesang. Das ist eigentlich so ein bisschen, wie wenn die den ganzen Tag ihren eigenen Namen singen. Also so wie wenn ich jetzt Wolfgang, 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 das wäre sozusagen meine Signatur und daran würden mich die Leute erkennen. Jedes Männchen wiederholt diesen Namen sozusagen wieder und wieder und wieder. Und der ist für ein Leben lang festgelegt, der ist fix, den lernen die einmal, wenn sie jung sind, und der bleibt dann immer so wie man halt auch nur einmal einen Namen bekommt.
Using their unique song, male zebra finches can maintain a strong bond with their partners and stimulate them to produce eggs. However, this is not the only way in which birds make and maintain bonds. Known as the clowns of the sea, Atlantic puffins are found on the coast of North America and on some islands in Western Europe. Their vivid beaks play a key role in courtship. In fact, this colourful extension of the bill only grows during this very important period, and then it is shed at the end of the breeding season. Atlantic puffins spend 2/3 of the year out at sea, and so when they finally make their way back to land to breed and raise chicks, there's a lot to celebrate as they reunite with their long-term partners or meet new ones. To ignite the flame in their relationship, both the male and female engage in a ritual known as billing. One so exciting, it can sometimes attract spectators. Once a bond has been formed, pairs will go ahead and either claim an existing burrow or excavate their own. Together, the pair will raise a single puffling. The female will spend most of her time ensuring their chick has enough to eat, whereas the male takes pride in defending the nest and maintaining it, finding and gathering the best quality nesting materials. Unlike many bird colonies, which are very obvious to the human eye, puffins are rather discreet. This burrow makes up just a very small section of the vast underground network of burrows within the colony. Nesting in large groups offers them safety in numbers from predators, and the bigger the group, the greater the chances of survival. Seabirds also benefit from social information sharing within the colony.
So they all fly out for foraging, and then if one of them has spotted this big shoal of fish that they can use, then the others are also going in that direction, and then they can forage together. And if you attack this fish shoal from different angles at the same time, you're also likely to be successful.
Dr. Sandra Buis is a seabird expert, working with common terns at the Institute for Avian Research at Wilhelmshaven in Germany. Over 1,000 common terns here have been fitted with transponders, identifying them individually for their entire lifespan, which can be over 20 years. The boxes dotted around the colony recognize the transponders and tell Sandra the identity of every tagged bird. From this, she knows each one's parents, offspring and grandparents for up to 7 generations by name, and can precisely study their lifelong behavior.
This big brother insight that you get into the lives of these birds, really from start to finish, it's very special. You start to individually recognize some of these birds. You can see them popping up in the colony every single year, and then to see how they change their behavior, what they manage to do, how that differs between the years. That's just, it's really up close and personal.
Sandra and her team discovered that as common terns grow old, they're able to raise more fledglings. But these chicks are less likely to return as breeders themselves, and if they do breed, have poorer reproductive success. Although younger couples produce healthier chicks, they're often lousy parents.
Young parents, first-time breeders, they sometimes bring the wrong type of prey. So if you are a common tern and you bring a big herring, that's really nice for courtship feeding because it gets your partner into breeding condition very fast. But then again, if you then have a chick and that chick is very small, it weighs maybe 17 grams, then it doesn't pay off to come with a huge herring because the chick basically can't swallow it.
Over time, the terns learn what size prey they need to bring their chicks, and get to know where to find fish of different sizes as their chicks grow. Older birds also learn to migrate more efficiently, arriving at the colony earlier, which gives them extra time to produce offspring. And so, gaining years of experience together as parents is something that rarely pays off for them. Much like humans, young common terns tend to try a few different partners before they find the one. But once they've decided on a mate, they exhibit a very intricate set of behaviors to solidify their bond. The first critical move is aerial courtship. The pair fly in large circles, calling to each other in the air.
And usually the female starts behaving a bit like a chick, so she puffs up her feathers a little bit and she starts begging. And the males then go off and they find a fish, and then they come back with these fish and present them to the females. They usually don't hand them straight away. They first sit there, like really showing off this big, important fish that they bring the female, and then give it to the female as a courtship feeding.
Living long lives with a dedicated partner means that common terns can even afford to abandon their chicks when there isn't enough food, as they can always wait for next year. But not all birds have this luxury, particularly those such as blue tits.
Blue tits are definitely very different. I mean, they're short-lived, so the chance of your partner showing up, even if you manage to show up in the next year, is already quite small. So then making a long-term commitment, I guess, doesn't really pay off.
Blue tits only live around 3 years and may just get one shot at producing offspring. So they do everything in their power to produce as many healthy chicks as possible. They're extremely attentive parents, spending months preparing for the arrival of their chicks, and will not rest until they're finally ready to fledge. Dr. Peter Santema works at the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology and uses the same transponder technology as Sandra, this time to monitor blue tits in the oak-rich forests of Bavaria.
Every single time a blue tit enters a nest box, we know about it. So it's kind of like a big brother system for blue tits.
Here, there are around 100 breeding pairs that can be tracked 24 hours a day, throughout the year. However, Peter and his team have noticed incredibly different behaviors in the blue tits compared to the terns. He and his team have discovered that in the key week when all blue tits begin egg laying, the strangest things are happening. Although they dedicate a lot of time to flirting with their partner, engaging in a romantic dance to solidify their relationship, both the males and females are secretly up to mischief. They get up extra early to sneak off to neighboring nest boxes to mate with others.
So normally what you would often think is that when a male and female raise a brood together, they'll be raising their own offspring. But what we found out is that often a female will have mated with one of the neighboring males. So not all chicks in a nest will be sired by the male who might think he is the father. So usually there may be 1 or 2 eggs that are sired by one of the neighboring males. And we refer to this as extra pair paternity.
Blue tits are what's known as socially monogamous, meaning both parents share the responsibility of raising the chicks. So when the female sneaks off, the male follows her to ensure he won't be lumbered with someone else's chicks to raise. But the males aren't completely innocent themselves and might also disappear to get an extra mating. Peter is trying to find out just how many chicks in this 40-hectare forest are the product of an extra pair copulation.
So they're going to be taking blood samples of all the chicks. With these blood samples we can tell who the father of each chick is. So this helps us for the paternity analysis. I'm just going to follow this little path and then find my colleagues who are processing chicks at the moment.
I just put them in there to keep them safe and warm.
But why do blue tits rely on these additional matings? And what's the benefit of such a strategy?
For males, it's easy to understand why they do it, because if a male manages to sire chicks in another female's nest, it increases its reproductive success. So it's kind of easy to understand why males would do it. But for females, it's different because they can only lay a certain number of eggs. So it's not clear to us why females would go out and look for copulations with neighboring males, given that they can only lay a limited number of eggs anyway.
One suggestion is that females may get help to raise their brood from additional males if their original partner doesn't show up. The technology that has allowed Peter to uncover these secrets has also revealed that promiscuity in the bird world is much more common than we once thought.
This is really not specific to blue tits. There's a few exceptions where there's no extra pair paternity whatsoever, but in most species it's actually quite common. And there are even species where more than half of all the offspring are sired by a male other than the male who's caring for the offspring. So the blue tits are not unusual in that respect.
The ability to live together and communicate is vital to the lives of birds. From safety against attacking predators, avoiding injury within rapidly moving flocks, forming long-lasting relationships with dedicated partners, and short ones with new flings. But as we discover more about the ways in which they interact and the importance of sound communication amongst birds, we can well imagine that noise pollution created by humans is a serious problem for them. Bird numbers around the world are declining, but with the help of new technology and science to better understand them and save them, there is hope that we can protect these incredible creatures before it's too late.